If anyone had told me that at 72 I would be sitting here telling a story of betrayal, longing, and forbidden passion, I would have laughed in their face. At my age, life should be calm, predictable, and free of the turbulence of youth. I should have enjoyed a quiet retirement with my husband, surrounded by the comforts of a life we had built together over decades. But life, as I've learnt, has a way of throwing curveballs at you when you least expect them. My name is Margaret, and I've been married to William for over 40 years. He is, by all accounts, a good man, intelligent, hardworking, and loyal. I adored him when we were younger. His sharp mind and dry wit were endlessly fascinating, and his ambition inspiring. But as the years passed, the very qualities that attracted me to him became the walls that divided us. William was always more comfortable with books than people, and even after he retired as a history professor, he spent most of his time locked away in his study, writing papers that no one asked for and chasing accolades that no longer mattered. Meanwhile, I was left to fill my days alone. I read, tended our garden, and visited friends when I could, but the emptiness of our home and marriage was inescapable. We had no children, although William had a son from his first marriage, Michael. He was a sporadic presence in our lives over the years, charming and affable, but always on the move. That all changed last spring. Michael, now 38 and recently divorced, arrived on our doorstep with a suitcase and a defeated look in his eyes. He needed a place to stay while he got back on his feet, and William, ever the pragmatist, took him in without hesitation. At first, I was happy to have company. Michael was a breath of fresh air in our quiet home, filling it with laughter and conversation. He was kind, attentive, and so full of life, qualities I hadn't realized I was starving for. But as the weeks turned into months, something changed between us. The casual camaraderie we shared took on a deeper, more dangerous tone. I never intended to betray William. In fact, I never thought I was capable of such a thing. But the heart is a fickle thing, and mine was desperate for connection, for passion, for something more than the quiet solitude that had become my life. What happened next was a whirlwind of emotions: guilt, desire, exhilaration, and heartbreak, all culminating in a decision that would change my life forever. If you're willing to listen, I'll tell you everything, every moment, every mistake, every consequence. If nothing else, my story is proof that life never stops surprising you, no matter how old you are. My life with William began like a fairy tale. I was 25 when we met, working as a librarian at the university where he was a young history professor. He was unlike anyone I'd ever met, brilliant, intense, and deeply passionate about his work. I was immediately drawn to him, captivated by his intellect and the quiet confidence with which he carried himself. We married 2 years later, and for a long time I thought I had found my happiness. William was an ambitious man, always striving for excellence in his field, and I was proud to support him. I ran our home, attended his lectures, and hosted dinners for his colleagues, all while continuing to work in the library. It was a busy but fulfilling life. The cracks began to show in the later years of our marriage. As William's career flourished, his attention to me diminished. He was consumed by his work, spending long hours at university and even longer hours at home in his study. I tried to be understanding, telling myself that his dedication was a testament to his brilliance. But as the years went by, it became harder and harder to ignore the growing distance between us. After he retired, I thought things might be better. Without the demands of his job, I hoped we would have more time for each other. But retirement only deepened the rift. William replaced his university office with his home office, spending entire days immersed in research and writing. He was chasing a legacy, he told me, as if the world would forget him if he didn't leave behind one last great work. And so my days were filled with silence. I kept myself busy with gardening, reading, and the occasional visit to friends, but the loneliness was inescapable. The house, once a place of warmth and laughter, had become a tomb, echoing with the memories of a life that no longer felt like mine. I often wondered what my life might have been like if I had made different choices. If I had pursued a career instead of devoting myself to William. If I had insisted on having children despite his reluctance. If I had married someone who looked at me as he once did, with admiration and love. But life doesn't offer do-overs, so I made peace with the choices I'd made. Or so I thought. The day Michael arrived, everything changed. It was raining cats and dogs the day Michael showed up at our door. I remember the way he looked, tired, disheveled, and utterly defeated. He held a suitcase in one hand and a bottle of whiskey in the other, his usual confidence replaced by something more vulnerable. "Hi, Margaret," he said, forcing a smile. "Is it all right if I come in?" I welcomed him in, taking his wet coat and offering him a cup of tea. William was in his study as usual, so it was just the two of us in the kitchen. Over steaming cups of Earl Grey, Michael explained the reason for his visit. His marriage, he said, had ended in a mess of infidelity and arguments, leaving him emotionally and financially exhausted. He needed a place to stay while he worked out his next steps. William, when he finally emerged from his study, was surprisingly accommodating. He offered Michael the spare bedroom and assured him he could stay as long as he needed. I was relieved, not only because I wanted to help Michael, but because his presence was a welcome distraction from the monotony of my days. At first, it was easy to have Michael around. He was charming and affable, always ready with a joke or a kind word. He filled the house with energy and warmth, and I looked forward to our conversations. We talked about books, films, and his plans for the future. He even joined me in the garden, helping me prune the roses and pull out the weeds. But as the weeks went by, I began to notice things about Michael that I hadn't before. The way his eyes would linger on me when he thought I wasn't looking. The way his smile seemed to light up whenever I entered the room. And then there were the moments when our hands brushed, small fleeting touches that sent a jolt of electricity through my body. I tried to dismiss it as my imagination, a lonely mind reading too much into innocent gestures. But the truth was, when I was with Michael, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. One evening, after William had gone to bed, Michael and I found ourselves alone in the living room. We sat on the sofa, shared a bottle of wine, and talked about anything and everything. The conversation took a more personal turn, and before I knew it, I was telling him things I hadn't even admitted to myself. "I feel invisible," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "like I just exist, like I'm not even a person anymore." Michael reached over and took my hand. "You're not invisible, Margaret," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You're incredible, and anyone who doesn't see that is a fool." I looked into his eyes and saw something there I hadn't seen in years. Desire. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't imagining things. Something had changed between us that night, something that could never be undone. Michael's words stayed with me long after I went to bed. "You are incredible, and anyone who can't see that is a fool." It wasn't just what he said, but the way he said it, with such sincerity, such conviction, that it unlocked something inside me. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. The warmth of his hand on mine, the way his eyes had locked on mine as if he could see right through me. For the first time in years, I felt seen, truly seen, and it was intoxicating. The days that followed were filled with a strange tension. Michael and I moved around each other as if trapped in an unspoken agreement. We didn't talk about what had happened that night, but the air between us crackled with a kind of electric anticipation. It wasn't long before that tension reached its breaking point. It was a quiet Thursday evening. William had gone to one of his academic society meetings, leaving the house to me and Michael. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when he came in, his hair damp from a shower and his sleeves rolled up to reveal the lean muscles of his forearms. "Smells good," he said, leaning against the counter and flashing me his boyish smile. "Just some pasta," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He moved closer, standing so close that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Can I help?" I looked up at him, and for a moment neither of us moved. The air between us was heavy, charged. And then, before I could stop myself, I said, "Michael, what are we doing?" His smile faltered, and for a moment I thought he might walk away. But instead he reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from my face. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I can't stop thinking about you." My breath caught in my throat. "That's wrong," I whispered, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear my own words. "Maybe," he said in a low voice, "but it doesn't feel wrong." And then he kissed me. At first it was tentative, as if he was afraid I would pull away. But when I didn't, the kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, more desperate. I felt his hands on my waist, pulling me closer, and I melted into him. All my fears and doubts drowned out by the sheer intensity of the moment. We didn't make it into the bedroom the first time. It happened in the kitchen, the world outside forgotten, as we surrendered to the passion that had been simmering between us for weeks. There was no turning back after that night. Michael and I fell into a pattern of stolen moments and secret rendezvous. We were careful, always waiting until William was out of the house or locked away in his study. It was risky, and the fear of being caught only added to the thrill. But it wasn't just the physical connection. We talked for hours, sharing our hopes, fears, and dreams. Michael told me about the pain of his divorce, the way he felt like a failure, and his fear of starting over. I told him about the loneliness I had carried for years, the emptiness that had become my constant companion. Michael made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in decades. He made me laugh, made me feel desirable, made me believe I was worth more than the quiet resignation I had settled for in my marriage. But with every moment of joy came an equal measure of guilt. I couldn't look at William without feeling the weight of my betrayal. He had always trusted me implicitly, never questioned my loyalty or my love. Yet here I was, having an affair with his son under his own roof. I tried to justify it to myself. I told myself that William had pushed me away, that he had made me feel invisible. But deep down I knew that wasn't an excuse. What I was doing was wrong, and the longer it went on, the harder it became to ignore the consequences. The turning point came one evening when William came home earlier than expected. Michael and I were in the living room, sitting a little too close on the sofa, our laughter filling the space between us. The moment William walked through the door, the atmosphere changed. His eyes darted between us, suspicion flickering across his face. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice tinged with unease. "Nothing," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "We were just talking." William didn't say anything, but the look he gave me sent a shiver down my spine. After that, things got even more complicated. I began to feel like I was walking a tightrope, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the moment when everything would come crashing down. Michael tried to reassure me, but even he couldn't deny the risks we were taking. "We'll be careful," he said one night, as we lay tangled together in the dark. "No one has to know." But I knew secrets like ours had a way of coming out. Secrets have a way of festering, growing heavier with time until they are impossible to bear. For weeks, I lived in a constant state of tension, feeling like a thief stealing moments of joy and passion that didn't belong to me. Every time I looked at William, the guilt clawed at me, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. Michael and I had fallen into a dangerous routine of stolen moments. A kiss in the hallway when William was busy in his study, a whispered conversation late at night when William was asleep. It was exhilarating, intoxicating, but also unsustainable. Deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. And then, one evening, it did. William had been invited to give a lecture at the university, a rare event, given that he had retired years before. I had assumed he would be out most of the night, giving Michael and me a false sense of security. We were in the living room, sitting close together on the sofa. Michael had his arm around my shoulders, and I leaned against him, feeling safe in his embrace for the first time in days. "I don't know how much longer we can do this," I said softly, my voice tinged with both longing and fear. Michael's fingers brushed over mine. "I don't want to stop," he said. "I can't stop." Before I could answer, the sound of the front door opening shattered the moment. Panic surged through me as I sprang to my feet, putting as much distance between Michael and myself as I could in those few seconds. But it was too late. William was standing in the doorway, his face a mask of confusion and suspicion. "What's going on?" he demanded, his voice low but dangerous. "Nothing," I stammered, my heart pounding in my chest. "We were just talking." William's eyes darted between us, narrowing as realization dawned. "Talking," he said, his tone dripping with disbelief. "Is that what you call it?" Michael stood up, his expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. "Dad, it's not what you think. Don't lie to me." William's voice cracked like a whip, cutting through the room and silencing us both. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece. Then, with a shuddering breath, William turned to me. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I opened my mouth to answer, but the words wouldn't come. What could I say? That it had begun weeks ago, that I had betrayed him in a way I never thought I was capable of. "It doesn't matter," William said, answering his own question. "You've said enough already." The days that followed were a blur of arguments, accusations, and tears. William kept confronting me, demanding answers to questions I couldn't bear to face. Why? How? Wasn't I happy? Did I ever love him? "I don't know," I told him one night, my voice hoarse from crying. "I don't know why it happened. I felt so alone." "Alone?" he said, his voice heavy with disbelief. "Do you think I haven't been alone? Do you think I haven't sacrificed things for this marriage?" I had no answer. How could I argue with him when I knew he was right? Meanwhile, Michael tried to reach out to me, but I couldn't bring myself to face him. The weight of what we had done was too much. I avoided him at every turn, retreating to my bedroom and locking the door when he was home. Eventually, he made the decision to leave. "I can't stay here anymore," he said one morning, his suitcase packed and waiting by the door. "It's not fair to any of us." I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "So am I," he said. And with that, he was gone. William and I were left to pick up the pieces of our broken marriage. It wasn't easy. The trust we had built up over decades was gone, replaced by a chasm of betrayal and resentment. At William's insistence, we began to see a counselor. At first, I was skeptical, but over time, the sessions became a lifeline. They forced us to confront the issues that had been festering in our marriage for years. The emotional distance, the lack of communication, the unspoken disappointments. "I felt invisible," I told him during one session, tears streaming down my face, "like I didn't matter to you anymore." William looked at me, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "And I felt like I was losing you," he said, "but I didn't know how to fix it." It was a painful process, but it also brought moments of clarity. We began to see each other not as the perfect partners we had once imagined, but as flawed, vulnerable human beings trying to navigate the complexities of life and love. As for Michael, I didn't hear from him for months after he left. Then one day I received a letter. "Margaret, I don't know if this will ever reach you, but I felt I had to say something. I'm sorry for everything, for the pain I've caused, for the mess I've made of your life. I never meant for any of this to happen, but I don't regret the time we had together. You made me feel alive again, and for that, I will always be grateful. I've moved to a new town and started a new job. It's not easy, but I'm trying to rebuild. I hope you and Dad can find a way to move on. You both deserve happiness. Take care of yourself. Michael." I read the letter twice before carefully folding it and putting it in a drawer. It was a bittersweet reminder of what had been lost, but also of what I had learned. The months that followed were a time of reflection and rebuilding. William and I continued our counselling sessions, slowly putting our marriage back together. It wasn't a perfect process. There were setbacks, arguments, and moments of doubt. But we were both determined to try. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, William reached over and took my hand. "I don't know if we'll ever be the same again," he said, "but I want to keep trying." I squeezed his hand, feeling a glimmer of hope. "So do I," said. It wasn't the fairy tale ending I once dreamed of, but it was real, and for that I was grateful. Looking back, I can't say I'm proud of the choices I made, but I've come to understand them. Loneliness can drive people to do things they never thought they were capable of, and I was no exception. I've learned that love is a complicated, messy thing. It's not always enough to sustain a marriage, and it's not always enough to prevent mistakes. But it can be enough to inspire forgiveness, growth, and second chances. And for that, I will always be grateful.